Welcome back. Now, the delegation, the European Union delegation, is a strategic partner of Kenya and has been present in the country since 1973. The European single market has more than 500 million consumers and is the main trading partner of Kenya, receiving more than a quarter of Kenyan exports, without any import tariffs or quota. Today we just want to find out how that relationship is going and how far it can go. We're joined in studio by the European Union Ambassador to Kenya, Lodewijk Briet. Welcome to the Power Breakfast Show.
Thank you very much.
It's been 2 and a half years for you in the country.
2.5 years, yes.
How has it been so far?
It's been fascinating. Fascinating and very enjoyable. And coming from South Africa, there are lots of comparisons you can draw, but I must say I'm very impressed with Kenya and with Kenyan people. They are sophisticated. They are with it.
Absolutely.
And it is amazing to see. You know, a quarter of Kenyans live essentially in urban areas, and so you get a sense. It helps the gridlock, but that being said, it gives you a sense of how modern Kenya is becoming and how much change has happened over the past decennia.
Of course, even back in 2003, you expressed the European Union's commitment and support to Kenya's reform agenda. How far has that gone in terms of supporting?
We are still very much there, and I think in terms of supporting the reform agenda, I think even the 2.5 years that I've been here, there's actually a lot that has been happening. I mean, the elections are really were obviously something that we all focused on, and you know, frankly, it's been quite impressive. And I think Kenyans have done Kenya proud, as I think the judiciary has. I mean, people tend to disagree on issues, and we wouldn't be people if we were not disagreeing. But it has been an incredible period and a fascinating one to have the privilege to observe up close. And we had EU observers in the country. We are convinced that these elections were credible and held in conformity with the laws of Kenya. And that's really what we were here to measure.
Can you give us some figures about the trade between Kenya and the European Union for the last, maybe since you've been here? How is it?
You know, we see Kenya as a strategic player, as you mentioned in your introduction as well. And we look at the region. We've essentially identified 2 areas in Africa over the past years in the External Action Service of the European Union as deserving more attention. One of them is East Africa. The other is the Sahel. For East Africa, we have developed a strategic framework for the Horn of Africa, and we are trying to deepen our relations with the East African community. We have major programs with the East African community, with IGAD, with the African Union, and most of these aim at building stronger ties, building capacity, and seeing to it, coming to trade, that inter-regional trade grows. And I was very interested to see what President Kenyatta said in Abuja just this week, because he says, you know, in foreign policy, what we are looking at is really trade, and particularly trade when it comes to Africa. Foreign policy priority 1 is Africa, 2 is Africa, 3 is Africa. I think that's a very good thing to say.
But that leaves the European Union aside then?
It doesn't leave us aside. I think we are very much in this market, have been in this market. But what is quite important is if you look at the intra-EU trade between member states of the European Union, it's between 60 and 80% of their trade. If you look at that here in the region, or even elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, same goes for North Africa, mind you, it is between 11 and 12%. Now there's a huge potential for greater growth, and not just in terms of the transit, you know, from Mombasa to the hinterland, to the landlocked countries. And we are very keen to assist in making that happen.
So what are we buying from Europe?
What you're buying is mostly machinery.
Machinery.
So you import round about 16, 17% of Kenya's imports comes from the European Union. A lot of it's machinery that then in turn is used here, creating employment in the process to create product that is also shipped out again. So we take around about 26% of Kenya's exports,
right,
just over a quarter. And if you compare that with some other emerging economies, that's actually quite a high percentage.
Mm-hmm. You're set to unleash a plan for the development of this country for 2014 to 2020. Perhaps you could tell us more about that.
Yes, the way we function in terms of our development cooperation is first of all by adhering to our commitments under the Millennium Development Goals. And that means that each member state commits to the funding that it contributes to the European Union to meet these goals. We then look internally at our medium-term financial framework, our financial perspectives over a 7-year period. And for the period 2014 to 2020, we've just set aside 40 billion shillings for sub-Saharan Africa alone. 40 billion shillings. So that's an amount of around about 350 million euros. It's quite important. We will be doing for Kenya alone around about these 350. Sorry, I'm confusing myself here. The amount that we have set aside for Kenya is 350 to 400 million euros. And that means that we are now and how is that being spent? Is obviously the next question. Well, there we look at Kenya's own priorities under Vision 2030. It's no longer like in the past that we were sort of saying, we think this is good for you. No, we ask Kenya what is good for Kenya in your opinion and how can we assist?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we always necessarily agree on exactly the way forward. An example is we've been quite heavily engaged in road infrastructure. Well, the policy today in Brussels is maybe it's not the best way of spending your grant funding. And I think what we will be increasingly start doing is look at more sophisticated forms of development assistance, where we try to come in with technical assistance. So we will, say a problem that urbanization creates. Which experts do we have inside the European Union who've been trying to deal with these issues? Can we bring them over here to share some of their expertise there where Kenya feels there is a demand for these
just to take you back, you had an interview last year, September, on Capital Talk, and you said no country will be lifted out of poverty as a result of development aid.
Right.
And if I also take you back to what US President Barack Obama said, the relationship with Africa should change from aid to trade. Yeah. How are you helping that transition from just aid to now trade?
Mostly by removing the barriers that exist today and by assisting the Kenyan business community in identifying issues where it sees obstacles to trade, either locally, both in Kenya and in the region, or in trade with the European Union. And they exist. If you look at phyto and phytosanitary standards, for example, they change all the time. Now, we should have, say, if you take pesticides, a pesticides control program that a given producer in Kenya, a farmer cooperative in Kenya, can access right from his laptop, from his computer, so that he knows these are minimum or maximum residue levels that are allowed and the reasons why. It ties in, these standards change because the world keeps changing, nature is changing, and we are having an impact on nature.
Right. The problems about our export because of that agricultural, because of the production. Some of them even go to human rights. How the people who are working those farms, were they properly treated or what chemicals were used there? And those things, as far as people are concerned, the farmer is not very much aware about that. They think maybe it's a discrimination.
Well, I mean, move over to Bangladesh and the textile production.
Yeah.
We have concluded with the textile associations in Bangladesh deals to make sure that the protection of workers locally is being taken up more seriously. And I cannot think of a parallel example in Kenya, but if there were issues which were related to proper protection of labor.
There have been very serious issues about flower farming, the export of flowers. There's a lot of NGOs questioning the people who work in flower farms, and many of them are owned by multinational companies.
Yes, yes.
So those issues are there, but are they being resolved? Or
I think that where there are issues, we need to tackle them, and where necessary, we need to tackle them jointly. There is nothing about unsustained. I mean, the sustainability of the relationship is what is important. The sustainability of our contribution to the promotion of trade flows is important. That sustainability ties in directly with what you say, and that is how workers on a flower farm are being treated. It's quite important. It's important to us. How are they exposed? I mean, if there is a question of people being exposed to the use of chemicals, whatever. It's important.
There was also a plain scanning horticulture, the kind of pollution they bring. There was an issue 2 years ago where there were complaints about pollution by cargo planes bringing flowers, bringing exports to Europe.
Well, and we had some 2 years ago problems with a volcano which prevented planes from taking off. It's an incredible flowing market if you see it, and the number of stems flowers exported is absolutely huge, and obviously not only to Europe. When they go to Russia, Japan, Asia, it's quite important. And frankly, I think it is something Kenya can be proud of. And it's not only multilaterals. A lot of Kenyan people in the flower business as well.
Yeah, just looking at the European Union kind of trade ties. American writer and blogger Charles Hugh Smith wrote an article titled "The EU Neo-Feudalism and Neo-Colonial Financialization Model," and this is basically what he says. The core nations of the European Union colonize nations through financializations, where nations borrow money only to buy finished goods sold by the core nations. In the end, the assets and income of the colonized nation flow to the core nations of the European Union as interest. Is that the case when you have trade?
I contest that, and rather vigorously so. There may have been a time that development aid was tied to spending back in the European Union. That time has gone for a long time now. So we are not into tied aid, and I think that's an important point. And that is why I strongly disagree with that thesis. We must treat Kenya as any other African country, as being completely equal partners. That's also the change, mind you, that I've seen in the United States. Think of Secretary Clinton's visit last year to Kenya. We're doing the same. I mean, it wouldn't be right otherwise. And I would frankly feel that we are speaking as equals. I mentioned before, Kenyans are sophisticated. We should talk with you as equals, not to you. And that's a big and important distinction. It's a lesson I learned quite strongly a couple of years back.
One of the major problems with our production is that we export for many years, since exporting raw material. When the new county governments are being established, all of them are singing songs about value addition. I do not know whether you think about looking at that, so that when you grow coffee or tea, we don't export tea or coffee to Europe and then it's packaged and brought back for us to sell. I don't know whether you think about adding value.
We just had this Monday the visit of our trade commissioner, the Belgian commissioner, who made a strong point on, for example, export taxes. You have in Kenya an export tax of 80% on raw hides and skins. It only makes sense to have an export tax if you use that tax to add value to the production chain, and therefore if you treat your skins and hides in such a way that you come up with a sophisticated input for the leather apparel production market. Otherwise the export tax makes no sense. We are strongly in favor of local beneficiation. It's quite important. Why would you export raw materials if you can give the treatment maybe up to the way to the final product here and create employment and add value? Another example there, mind you, is fish. If we continue to support unregulated, illegal and unreported fishing, doesn't help Kenya. We can't control it, but we need to try to make sure that there is an added value in these chains. In this case, one that helps, the further establishment of the Kenyan fishing industry. There are lots of examples around this, and there's a lot of potential. And that is where I think it's wonderful to see, you have the studies about African futures done by Colorado University or Denver University and the Institute for Security Studies. East Africa is a very promising part of the world in terms of its growth.
There's another article by a writer, George Roberts, and he has titled it The EU and Regional Integration in Africa, Shades of Neocolonialism. And he says the different kinds of trade relations in Africa, including South Africa, favor the more developed European market rather than the development of African economies. In fact, he cites cases such as flooding of the local market with cheap EU exports and predatory investment.
Listen, the idea that we would be flooding, for example, as a result of the economic partnership agreements, the African markets with European products is a complete fallacy. It's a complete fallacy. I mean, which products would you be talking about? Where would that happen? These trade negotiations really aim at duty-free, quota-free access to the European market, and they aim at promoting, at reducing the number of non-tariff barriers, and at promoting regional trade as well as trade flows. We obviously have an interest in that as well. I mean, we must not kid ourselves. But we would benefit as well if there were greater trade among African countries. Yeah, so I don't buy that neo-colonialism argument in any which way.
Because
sometimes people think we have a hidden agenda. And we don't have any. Please tell me what the hidden agenda is.
Perhaps just for clarification purposes, because there's a claim that trade liberalization leads to development. But it basically says fragile economies are exposed to competition and governments are deprived of vital sources of revenue from customs duties.
Yes. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, what you need to make sure is that you have a system that is sufficiently sophisticated. You're going to have an interest at some point as Kenya to make sure that you protect intellectual and industrial property rights properly so as to reduce the number of counterfeit products that are circulating here. We are ready to assist.
All right.
There where you feel that we can assist. And that goes across the board. I mean, the rot of corruption. I mean, and frankly, counterfeit has become, a big illegal industry. And it hurts consumers. And we've just opened with Cabinet Secretary Adan Mohammed the Counterfeit Awareness Week, just a small month ago. It's one of those issues which is quite important in this context. If we can make sure that we can, and I commend the efforts made by the President and the Deputy President to say you need Mombasa to be operating more efficiently. You know, the same goes for Dar es Salaam. No, this is not a Kenyan-specific problem, and I'm sure we've been there in the past. Many of the problems that you're facing are problems we have faced ourselves, including corruption. I mean, it would be a lie to say there's no corruption in our countries. But we need to be very, very careful that we need to weed this out, because the cost in terms of efficiency are huge, huge, huge. And therefore, we need to make sure that we can work with single customs documents, with single controls, sealed containers. That means harmonized procedures from one EAC country to the next. It makes no sense to talk about a single EAC market if we continue to apply different procedures and different documents. Right. Been there, done it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Back in 2012, the European delegation gave civil society grants of 133 million shillings to enable them establish new political systems and peace campaigns. That's according to the Nation, 2012, September 13th. My question is, do you have any level of control or influence when it comes to the management of civil societies, how they conduct their business after giving them such an amount?
First of all, on the figure, you are including in that any support we gave to the elections.